And we're live with Josh Crosson from Ed Allies in Minnesota, education nonprofit that is working on public policy to make sure that every kid gets a great education in the state of Minnesota and beyond. Josh, thank you for joining this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk for a couple of reasons. We have had multiple people on locally from Minnesota, my home state, where I am right now. And there's a lot going on in Minnesota that's making the world pay attention to us for once. We have a situation that I think is pretty common to places that have very liberal cities, very college educated populations, very booming economies, which is that life is good. And we top the list on many things. And we're very proud of ourselves, super smug, and we love ourselves so much. Our lakes are awesome. Our bike streams are amazing. We've got goat yoga, the whole thing. Anyways, and at the same time, beneath it all, we have the common refrain, which is the achievement gap, the things that I just said, the great lifestyle that we have is missing people of color, low-income people, Black folks specifically, Latino and Latina folks specifically. And the constant refrain and question is, but we're good people. Mm-hmm. How could this be? And maybe we just need to put more money into being good people, even more than we've been so far. But I like what you do, Josh, because you actually work in public policy, and in public policy, we know that that's where the rubber hits the road on how life is formed in states like ours. And we have bad public policy in a lot of places. We have great public policy in terms, I think, personally, this is just commentary. In terms of things like human services, I think we outperform the surrounding states. In terms of things like rental assistance, heating and winter assistance, and food stamps, all of that sort of thing, we do, I think, pretty well in comparison to surrounding states. Then you get to the schools. Mm-hmm. Once you get to the schools, all hell seems to break loose in terms of public policy. I want to talk about one thing real quick to get started, which is how our public policy allows, over the years, has been doing a job of allowing weaker and weaker teachers to get in the front gate of teaching and into our classrooms, while at the same time, ironically, keeping veteran or experienced and trained teachers of color out of the classroom who may move here from another state or who may cross industries and want to come into teaching. How does that happen, Josh? Tell me what's the sausage making of the public policy that makes that happen.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to go back to your original idea. I think what I often hear when I meet with legislators or just meet with leaders in the community and say we need to create drastic changes in our schools to ensure that each and every kid, especially our traditionally underserved students, have a great education. The pushback that I get is, but they're in poverty. But their family structure isn't there. But they don't have books on the shelves, right? As you said, Minnesota is really good at providing, or at least funding social services. I don't know about providing them. I'm hearing similar concerns from social service networks around the state as well. But we are the top 5 among states in the nation of how much we spend on social services for families. We spend above the national average on education per pupil, in a country that our country is number 1 in one area in education, and that is per pupil spending. But among first world countries, we are 27th in the world, right, in reading and math. So in Minnesota, we are above the national average in a nation that's already above it all, right, in terms of spending. And so we're not seeing the results. We're not seeing the outcomes when 1 in 3 of our kids of color are reading or doing math at grade level, or we have the lowest high school. We actually just jumped the lowest. So now we have the lowest high school graduation rates for Black students and Latinx students in the country, and the second lowest high school graduation rates for Asian Pacific Islander students and Native American students in the country, right? So you can grow up anywhere else in this country that's probably investing less in education in terms of money, and get a better education and graduate high school on time.
Including the proverbial Mississippi.
Including Mississippi, the worst The 50th, the worst high school graduation rate means the worst high school graduation rate. Mississippi is beating us, South Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, right? Like these are all
West Virginia.
West Virginia,
Yeah.
and all states
Wow.
that are outperforming us in terms of reading and math standards. So it's not just graduation rates. A lot of people come back and say, well, they have lower standards for their high school graduation. So that's sometimes true. But when also we measure for reading and math, they're outperforming us there as well. But that's all. That is all the combination of public policy and money does not fix the problem. I think what fixes the problem is addressing the deep-seated racism in the state. Uncle Remus said, if there's a book in the hand, that means there's one less plow being held, right? I think in Minnesota, we're seeing that.
For my audience, very first time anybody has ever quoted Uncle Remus on this show. Very first time. It's first time for everything. I need a bell to go off when first time things happen. Ding, 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 ding. First right. Uncle Remus reference. Continue on, brother. Continue.
Yeah, but we have that in Minnesota, right? We've often heard education is wasted on people of color and low income people. They quote have enough choice. They're just never going to make it. So when we have this belief in this state where kids are never going to make it, kids are going to achieve to the standards set or the ideas set by the adults around them. When we have low expectations for them, they will meet those low expectations. So we are in a state that believes very little of our children, resulting in the poor outcomes of our students. And so that's kind of where we are. I mean, right? We can create public policy. We can invest resources, but as long as we still have that mindset that kids of color and low income kids and kids with disabilities are never going to make it, we're just really not going to get anywhere.
I think it's interesting. Go back to this part about though what you see with legislators. You're up at the Capitol. You speak with legislators. I know some of the ones that you speak with and talk to. They frustrated me for a very long time with their smug belief in self. Like we are for equity. We are for feeding the people and getting everybody everything that they need and whatever, the whole liberal kit. We're for it. And then you start talking to them about the fact that we need great teachers in classrooms. Yep. We need schools that are held accountable for outcomes. We need to talk about how we evaluate not just the teachers, but the principals, the schools, the districts, how we hold people accountable. And then there's zero interest after you get to that point. Yeah. Why is that? For people who think they're so great, why is that?
Yeah. Well, and going back, I recently heard this journalist speak about how at this time, post George Floyd's murder, we are not in 1968. We are closer to 1868, right? Ooh. This journalist said that post-slavery, during Reconstruction, there was this newfound commitment among white people to ensure that we live in a diverse community where we're celebrating diversity. People of color felt empowered for the first time to speak out against injustices. We had, immediately after our families, the bonds were broken and they're no longer enslaved people. We had 3 senators, U.S. senators, Black U.S. senators come out of the South. So people of color were empowered. They were being employed. They had ownership. They had power. They had money. As you often point out, Chris, that was the time when Black wealth skyrocketed, when Black education skyrocketed, and we were at a tipping point. White people can say we truly value diversity and we truly value the contributions of Black Americans, or we can enact laws to prevent the growth of Black Americans further, because I'm very uncomfortable about the sacrifices that I have to give right now. I'm concerned that they're getting too much power. I'm concerned they're getting too much wealth. And so what we did was we went, I'm concerned as white citizens, so I'm going to start enacting Jim Crow laws. So we went from 3 U.S. senators, home ownership, high education rates, high wealth, pulling ourselves up from our own bootstraps, as I often hear, to enacting laws to prevent Black Americans from being able to succeed in this nation. So we learned that whites just did not want to give up their own power, that diversity was a little too uncomfortable, and people of color have lacked power and wealth onward. So I think what we see at the Capitol, at least before George Floyd's murder, was a continuation of that mindset that that we really need to be focusing on white power. We need to really be focusing on white wealth and white responsibility, and that also translates to the schools. We have two groups of white people that we care about in our schools. One group is our teachers, and our teachers are about 96% white. And then another group that we care about in our schools is our administration. And our administration is almost entirely white, right? Mm-hmm. So these two groups kind of battle it out, and legislators are saying, well, I'm going to stand with the teachers over here. Other legislators are going to say, I'm going to stand with the principals. I'm going to stand with the administration. Who's standing with our students, especially our students of color?
Yeah. Well, you are. I mean, this is the thing. Like Ed Allies and groups like it are really filling the void because, I said all the time, students don't have a union. Right. Students don't have anybody who fight ruthlessly for their best interest every day up at state capitals. And you have heard me say it a million times. One of the things that gets on my nerves the most is when people say, we don't have enough teacher voice in education. We don't get teacher voice. We need to hear teachers more. And teachers love teachers this, teachers that. It gets on my last damn nerve as somebody who's been up at the Capitol. And if you believe that every state capitol is not overrun with teacher voice, with people walking the halls all day long, having lunches and breakfasts and happy hours with legislators and providing them talking points and pre-made policies, you are stupid, right? Because our kids don't stand a chance. You just mentioned a couple of them, and you've spent a lot more time than I have up at the Capitol because it annoys me. But in those halls, I have seen the principals associations, the superintendents of schools, the teachers unions, all of the other bargaining units within public schools, and the school board association, right?
Right. Yep.
You don't stand a chance, really, if you're walking up in there within your hand like a child-focused policy that needs to get through that juggernaut, because you're talking to sometimes, and just let me be critical for a moment, oftentimes you're talking about legislators who are pompous and spend their time sitting on a toadstool all day and waiting for people to bring stuff to them. And they're like little kings and princesses. They're just like, no, I won't listen to that today. No, I won't listen to that today. And, story I've told before, sat with the legislator with all Black people and Black leaders from the community asking for a very common sense policy change to help us with Black students in the Twin Cities. And that legislator pulled out a piece of paper. She looked clueless about what we were talking about, and until something rang out, she pulled out a piece of paper, and at the top of the paper was Education Minnesota, the statewide teachers union logo on the piece of paper that she pulled out, and she literally talked to us with points from that particular piece of paper. She was ready for us before we came.
Right. Yep. I always say, I mean, when I'm at the Capitol, it's me and probably one or two committed parents. We're the only people of color when we're talking about education policy in our entire state. I live in Minneapolis, where about 70% of our students are of color. St. Paul, where the Capitol is, has about 80% students of color. And it's sad when one or two people who are actually represent the communities that they're from are at the Capitol fighting for our kids. And when I'm there, there's usually 5, 6, 7 lobbyists from the teachers union, from administrative bodies, sitting right behind me. And I'll say, Chris, too, it's not just the power at the Capitol. It's power with money. It's power with influence. The statewide teachers union is the most powerful body among the Democratic Party. And I don't say that lightly. I say that as the amount of money that they invest in candidates. If they were to go away tomorrow, it would be an existential crisis for the Democratic Party in Minnesota. There would be no Democratic Party if the teachers union went away tomorrow because of how much they invest in the party. And so when I'm going up against leaders, both Republican and Democratic leaders, the Democrats often say, well, first question, where does Education Minnesota stand on this? Because I would not be here. Our party would not be here if Education Minnesota were to go away tomorrow. And who does Education Minnesota represent? They represent our most senior white educators in the process of us thinking about how do we diversify our teacher workforce? How do we make sure that kids of color are being served? They represent white senior educators. So I'll say that there's no real union for kids. There's no real union for parents. There's really no real union for our teachers coming into the profession, and no real union for our Black and brown educators.
For younger educators specifically, anybody who's listening to this nationally, if you're a young educator and you want to teach, don't come here. You're getting hosed from the very beginning. And the old teachers don't give a damn, because all you are is gristle and fuel for their pensions. So chill out. You don't come. I should take that back. You come here and teach. Don't let me start telling too much truth in the morning. See, Lionel Richie got me going. But be careful, because the scales are tilted towards older teachers. Anybody who's watching this, I don't know if this is the same where you are in other states, but for sure in Minnesota, the scales are not tilted towards younger teachers.
They are definitely not tilted. So I think with the union too, right? I mean, we saw Randy Weingarten on Twitter saying, I stand with Education Minnesota. I stand with St. Paul Federation of Educators. Oh, and by the way, I also stand with George Floyd, right? Or we saw a campaign right now in Minnesota where nearly all white people saying, I stand with my local union, and then I stand with George Floyd, misspelling George's name. I think we're at I think we're at a tipping point again where the union can stand for Black and brown communities. The union can stand with communities who've been speaking out against injustices in our education system, and I really hope they do. They're speaking a lot about wanting to be there, but I think the first step is to sit down, open up their ears, listen to parents and students, because it's going to take that much work first to listen. I saw a tweet yesterday that was like, white people like, how can I help? And then people of color like, just listen to me. And then white people saying, that seems too hard. Anything else? Right?
Yeah. What else you got in there, homie? I don't want to listen. I want to lead something. I want to draw some signs.
Exactly. Exactly. So for them, it's really to take a step back and say, we have all of this power. We have all of this money. How are we going to give it to communities of color? And I think the first step there is really thinking about diversifying our workforce. Minnesota, we have 4% of our licensed teachers are of color. 6% of our teachers currently teaching in the classroom are teachers of color. We are the whitest teaching cohort in the region is the whitest teaching cohort in the nation. Where Minnesota is only beat out by North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And so we have we're more diverse than North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin. We're kind of teetering, but I think the focus really needs to be increasing teachers of color. Teachers of color increase student proficiency rates. Teachers of color reduce suspensions and expulsions for kids of color. It really has to be the focus. And what we do with that knowledge is we use it lightly. We use teachers of color and the need to increase teachers of color to kind of mess around the edges and give certain people more power in their ability to fight for what they've always been fighting for, which happens to also serve the interests of white people. A couple of months ago, our policy manager, Michelle Kofa, testified in front of the state Senate, arguing for the need for new teacher preparation programs, alternative teacher preparation programs that are recruiting 60-70% teachers of color in the states where they exist. They're not in Minnesota right now, and we want those programs that do a really good job of recruiting teachers of color here in the state of Minnesota. She's a Black woman, Michelle, testified to this point, and then suddenly, right after, a white male professor at a traditional teacher preparation program came up after her and said, "I am also interested in teacher diversity, and co-chair of the Teachers of Color Coalition, and I oppose any new efforts to create and recruit teacher preparation programs that would recruit teachers of color in the future. Because that white man was able to kind of invoke teachers of color and say, we are part of this coalition that supports teachers of color, 2 Democrats on the spot dropped their support of a bill that would introduce alternative teacher preparation programs, and 60% of teachers coming into the state, in the face of a Black woman saying, here's what we need in Minnesota, here's where you need to invest. The state Senate was more comfortable siding with the white guy who was also saying, he supports teachers of color over people of color who are actually fighting for really hard policies and hard investments for the legislature to make, fighting for teachers of color. So we're seeing in Minnesota, they're talking a big game, but not actually putting their money or their policy where it counts, and not making traditional systems feel uncomfortable.
You just said a minute ago that you think that the game changer really is getting more teachers of color through the door and in the classroom and licensed. And to a great degree, I think that would be fantastic for our kids, like for them to wake up every morning and go to schools where they were facing more teachers of color, interfacing with more teachers of color, and getting a broader understanding of the world. And all of the research is in our favor when it comes to that argument. All the research tells us that that's a good thing for kids, period. Not just for kids of color, but for white kids too. Just across the board, it's a good thing to have teachers of color. However, the biblical thing about putting, new wine into old wineskins is really problematic for us. If we do not change the fundamental power balance between white and Black in Minnesota, all policies will fail underneath it. Because the story that you just told, where you can have an actual member of the community, a Black woman in education, like there are so many of here locally, who goes up to the Capitol and faces damn near an all-white power base of people who all are smug and believe themselves to be amazing, beautiful, liberal, Obama voting people who do the right thing in all social cases and whatnot. But the Black woman comes to say, this is what I need, and this is what we need as a people. And what she's missing is a white person with a penis to stand next to her and say, I own her, and I am going to vouch for her. And then all of you are going to give me license to whatever I want after that. So she doesn't face a chance, like I said, because she's done. White person with penis shows up and says, I have people of color too. And they agree with me. And what they agree is that we should keep the system relatively the same in terms of the power structure, the balance, who owns it, who gets paid, how they get paid, and all that. And they should be all white. But they should have great Black people near them. They should have great people of color who will come and stand behind them and shake their heads like people who get grants do. Like, oh my God, yes, this white person's amazing. We love him. Yes, he's got the full thing. Forget what that that Black woman just said to you about what their community needs, because we're with a white guy. So if that doesn't change, we could pass a lot of policy, and we're still going to be in the same boat.
Yeah, you probably heard it, Chris. The NAACP even supports me, right?
Oh my God, yes.
The NAACP is my best friend. So you have to support me too. Don't listen to those people of color over there. Listen to me as a white person, because the NAACP even supports me.
Which is amazing here in Minnesota, because here in Minnesota, in a lot of these cases, the Minneapolis NAACP, which is Minneapolis is the metro of the entire state, the Minneapolis NAACP won't support them on a lot of things. Actually will support us and what we're saying on things, and they will still find a way to find other Negroes. And if they can't find other Negroes, they'll find other diet Negroes, kind of Negroes to come and say, no, the white guys got it right. We don't need any more systems, any new pathways.
I mean, they'll go to St. Paul. I got kicked out of the NAACP St. Paul meetings because my thoughts were too radical for their ideas, right? So
a damn shame.
So I mean, I think exactly right. So I think a couple areas where our traditional systems are just not working for communities of color. One is licensure. So how we're welcoming teachers into the state. 2 is layoffs. How we're preventing educators from staying and growing within their profession. And three is that just that the realities of being a person of color in a building that's all white or almost all white. So whether that's professional growth opportunities, mentorship, pay, reimbursements for tuition. So those are kind of the three big areas that we're seeing are barriers for educators of color. Well, first with licensure, licensure traditionally has been a way for professions to stay insular, to say we want a certain type of person to stay within this profession. I was hearing a story recently out of Italy where they had licenses specifically for gondoliers, keeping women away from the profession of being a gondolier. And it was a huge court case. Should we dismantle licensure? And the number one argument against having women come into the profession with this license was they're going to lower our standards. They're going to lower our standards within this profession. What did that mean? It meant they're not meeting the standard of being a man. We are hearing this over and over again in Minnesota. There was a town hall I was listening in on about police reform, and one of the critics of police reform are saying we've lowered the standards for what it means to be a police officer to allow Black and brown cops to be on the street, and that's why police are misbehaving in the state. It's because we've lowered the standards to allow people of color to become police officers. In teaching right now, when we talk about common sense pathways for teachers to enter the classroom, the number one argument we get is you're lowering the standards, and that is, and from teachers of color who support those systems are saying, if you lower the standards here, what are my white colleagues going to think about me in the future? They're going to say that I was, a diversity hire, that I'm not to par, and I can't have that. So we need to make sure that the standards that we've created, these white standards, are still in place so that I can be seen as a real professional within my building. Not even questioning that the ideas or the descriptions of what a quote professional is as a teacher is the image of a white woman in Minnesota. We have very few Black people. We have very few. We have negligible amounts of Native in our schools. Bless you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries. And then we have few men as well in our schools. So when we talk about licensure, teacher licensure in particular, we have to think about the language that we use in order to keep certain people out of the profession, and how we're so, as a state, we're so averse to making any changes to include the people that we say that we want as part of the profession, but we make actual no changes to the gateways that we've created for those people.
On that point, let me ask a question around that, though. That's hard for me to understand sometimes. We're making it hard for some people to get in the profession, but at the same time, in Minnesota, like many other places, we're also lowering the bar for who can get in. So help me understand, technically, explain to me, like I'm incredibly dense and like I don't get things. We have these 4 tiers of licensure or something in the state of Minnesota, like a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, whatever.
Yeah.
There's some sort of scheme in which, when you look at the way we legislated around those, we're attempting, in some ways, it feels like, to make the bar lower for people that can't pass the basic skills test or whatever. Over time, we've seemed to lower the bar on who can get in the bottom end. Like we continue to lower that because too many people aren't getting in. And the cry to do that always is, well, it's keeping people of color out of the classroom, so we got to lower the bar. We got to get rid of these, entrance tests. And at the same time, we have, like through TFA, for instance, 100% of their people of color are able to pass those tests. And we keep trying to rig the system so that they can't get or stay in the classroom. And not even just them. We have, in Minnesota, we have lots of Fortune 500 companies, for instance. So we have people move here where one of the family members might be a teacher and one is going to work at one of our fabulous companies here. And the person who's moving here from somewhere else, fully licensed where they came from, we're making it hard for them to get in the classroom too. Or we have, I don't know if we've corrected that. Maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels like for a while we made it hard for them to get in the classroom.
Yeah, before 2015, Minnesota, and this is the case with a lot of other states, Minnesota wasn't welcoming to teachers outside of the state. Like I said, we're the whitest teacher cohort in the nation. So just by pure osmosis, we would have been able to diversify our workforce. But Minnesota said, we are exceptional. We do it better than anybody else. We're not going to let anybody else come in from another state. And if they do come in here from another state, they have to redo their licensure work if their license doesn't meet exactly how we want their license to look. So really, really bad right off the bat. So after 2015, we reconfigured our licensure laws and said, all right, we're going to have 4 different types of licenses. We're going to have Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4. Easy way to remember it is Tier 1 is a 1-year license, Tier 2 is a 2-year, Tier 3 is a 3-year, Tier 4 is a 5-year. That's right. So we have Tier 1. You have a bachelor's degree. You have some experience in the profession. Say you're an engineer or you're a native elder, and you want to teach something to students in your community. You can get this Tier 1 license to come enter into the profession. You can work your way up to a Tier 2, and a Tier 2 is somebody who has like a master's degree or a PhD in the content area, that they're currently in a professional teacher preparation program like Teach for America. Teach for America teachers are all Tier 2 teachers. And you have this kind of Tier 2 pathway. So the idea is working up the ladder. Then you have these Tier 3 teachers who are kind of our more traditional teachers, right? They either have 3 years of experience with a good evaluation as a Tier 2 teacher, or if they've completed a portfolio or a teacher preparation program. And a Tier 4 is a master teacher. Those are the teachers we want to teach other teachers. They've completed preparation. They've shown that they've mastered the content and the basic skills. They are ready to lead a new generation of educators. And that's kind of how we set up the tiered licensure system. What we're seeing, though, is an attempt to eliminate Tier 1 and Tier 2 teachers, get rid of that pathway altogether, and make it easier for our more traditional teachers, our Tier 3 teachers, to get up to Tier 4. So in the name of trying to keep our standards high, folks are saying, well, let's make sure that no students go into a Tier 1 or Tier 2 teacher's classroom, which was a policy that was introduced at the legislature. Let's make sure that when we lay teachers off, we're laying off the Tier 1 and Tier 2 teachers first, which is a policy out of St. Louis Park, which is a school district here in Minnesota. They are attacking Tier 1 and Tier 2 teachers, which is a problem because 25% of our teachers of color here in the state of Minnesota are teaching with a Tier 1 and Tier 2 license, while at the same time saying for these Tier 3 teachers and Tier 4 teachers who are predominantly white teachers, because they've gone through the system and have ensured that they wanted to be a teacher at age 17, and currently they are teachers at Tier 3 and Tier 4. We're saying, well, let's try to make life a little bit easier for you. So if you want to become a Tier 4 teacher, you don't need a good evaluation in order to be that master teacher. You can just go right into the Tier 4 licensure area. Or if you want to become a Tier 4 teacher, we won't look at how well you know the content or the skills. You could just go ahead and be a Tier 4 teacher. All you just need is a couple more years of seniority. So we've made it more difficult for teachers of color, for people who are interested in the profession, in coming into the profession and staying within the profession, and easier for traditional, more senior teachers to stay and to be elevated within the profession. So we're lowering standards for our more traditional teachers. And I wouldn't say lowering the standards for Tier 1 and Tier 2. What I would say is we're creating pathways that just make sense for people who want to come into the profession. If you're a professional, if you're an engineer, why wouldn't we want your experience? Why wouldn't we want you as a master's degree or PhD to come and teach in the skill set that you are so knowledgeable in? And we had one teacher testify. She was a PhD in American history and social studies, teaching in one of our schools. And she said, if you pass this policy to kick me out as a Tier 2 teacher, I will just go and teach at a private school. I would make more money at an elite private school as a Black woman who has a PhD. I am wanted, but I don't want to teach at a private school. I want to teach at a public school. And the first question that she was asked by a white legislator was, why don't you just do the extra work and become a real teacher?
Now, this is a question I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Because when you're a Black woman with a PhD who wants to teach in urban public schools and you face that question, does the person asking you that question, do they have a PhD?
Nope.
I mean, this is how
not.
whiteness works. This is exactly how whiteness works. Think about the absurdity of the moment you just described.
Yeah.
Black woman with a PhD who wants to teach in urban public schools that desperately need Black women with PhDs who want to teach in urban public schools,
Yep.
who's being asked, why don't you just go back and get some more education in our inferior, raggedy ass state system of educating people who miseducate people? Why don't you go back and do some more time there?
Exactly.
That is so absurd, Josh. I don't know how people don't laugh at a moment like that.
She wasn't a PhD, the legislator. She is a union organizer and became a legislator because of the
union organizing.
Union organizing.
Yeah, which elevates people just like that. People who would sit in a chair to ask something so stupid of a Black woman with a PhD who wants to teach in urban public schools.
Right.
Why don't you go back and get some more education so you can teach in our raggedy ass schools?
Right.
I can't.
Yep.
I can't, Josh. I just can't.
Our unions should be embarrassed by questions like that from people who represent their institution.
Oh my God, they're not embarrassed by anything.
No, they're not, but they need to
be real. They need to be, but they're not.
If they're so dedicated to racial justice in our schools, they need to be embarrassed by questions like that criticize and push out these, PhD Black woman in our public schools, and you want to push her out. I just don't understand that.
No, and I don't know how it stands. And let's be real. So when we're talking about the teachers union in Minnesota, we are talking about a white woman's collective. Mm-hmm. Let's just be real. And anybody who knows from birth of a nation onward till now, what white women want in politics, white women often get in politics, especially when it comes to, you told us earlier in this conversation, there is no Democratic Party in Minnesota without the teachers union. It's the most major force of foot soldiers who have the social capital and the social control to be able to make their neighbors vote for people. And that is a white woman's collective. And to the extent that they endorse you as a person of color, you are golden. You can work within the system. But the price of doing that is not asking any questions, not raising any red flags about racism or things that they're doing in their practices. And then they love you to death. You can share apple pie recipes with them and rhubarb recipes and hot dish recipes with them. And you can, all sit around with bad haircuts and drink box wine and you're in. But the bottom line is, you cannot actually bump up against the system without bumping up against them. So you have to either comply or leave.
Exactly.
And I hate to be so coarse about it, but I'm many years in watching this scenario and sick of all of the lies that they tell, all of the self-congratulations they give themselves for how broad-minded and liberal they are. And then you come here, Josh, and you tell me a story like that, which absolutely just sets my head on fire, right? Yeah. If I had hair, I'd be pulling it out right now, right? Like, the one story, Leanne Stevens like I do, and I'm going to have her on soon. Yeah. I tell her story everywhere I go just because we know it very well here in Minnesota, but I think other people should know. As a person who was a Black woman teacher in Minneapolis public schools who wanted to stay there, she now teaches in the suburbs and has for most of her career because she got accessed, let go for, because of seniority. And people forget that seniority, the history of seniority, the root of seniority was to protect white workers from advancing Black and brown workers who were gaining rights within the workplace. Right. That is the root of seniority. Anybody who tells you otherwise is lying to you, and we can have a whole show on it. But you just told me with the tier 1, 2, 3, and 4, the way that it's rigged and it's stacked, it is really rigged and stacked against the whiter, more veteran teacher who may or may not be performing, and against the younger teacher of color who oftentimes actually came in with more, I don't want to say credentials, but didn't have any trouble passing like basic skills tests. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. I don't know how you survive this, Josh. I don't know how you don't go crazy. How you still smile every morning.
Yeah, no, whenever I smile, whenever anyone asks me that, I say I'm dead inside. No, I
don't blame you.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. You're absolutely right. So Leanne Stevens is a person who she was the 2016 Teacher of the Year. Was laid off from Minneapolis public schools before she became Teacher of the Year. Went and got picked up from another school district nearby, and then became Teacher of the Year. Tom Rademacher, also a Minnesota Teacher of the Year, was laid off because he lacked seniority. Burnsville, they just laid off a Somali woman, I think she was, a finalist for Teacher of the Year. Our layoff policies in the state of Minnesota, like you said, value seniority. but we don't talk about with seniority is who has the privilege of being a senior educator. When we create barriers, and we're just now thinking about teacher diversity, our more senior teachers are going to be white. They're going to be kind of this old mindset of diversity doesn't really matter as much, right? But our newer teachers, because we have this like renowned, like this newfound wokeness within the state, we're increasing teacher diversity. I think the last number I saw coming out of preparation programs in the state of Minnesota, 12% of our new teachers coming into our schools are going to be teachers of color, where we only have 4% of our licensed educators as teachers of color. But in 2015, Minnesota just repealed our layoff laws. And in Minnesota, our laws, not contracts, our laws in the state stated that if layoffs happen in Minnesota schools, you have to lay off the last teacher hired. So it was last in, first out, seniority rules. You have to fire all of the new teachers and keep our more senior teachers. That policy is a regressive policy and hurts educators of color, hurts teacher shortage areas. And now we're kind of rethinking that, right? Now that the union is saying we have this kind of renowned, this newly found wokeness, we want to be better allies for people of color. How do we do it? I think one policy where almost all Minnesotans agree, 70% of educators, according to an Educator for Excellence survey, showed that repeal of last in, first out policies would actually be beneficial to the profession and to the students that they're serving. And so I think, going forward, I really challenge policymakers to say, instead of valuing seniority over all else, I really want them to value diversity, experience, effectiveness in our teaching profession, so that our students can get the best educators rather than just focusing on our most senior educators. And that also means not replacing last in, first out with another bad layoff policy that hurts students. Again, I focus on St. Louis Park here because they're the one school district that I know of that replaced their last in, first out policies. Great, but again, they replaced it with, well, let's just lay off all of our tier 1 and tier 2 teachers first.
Which tier 1 and tier 2 means what? It means
that they are leaders or professionals, or they are highly educated people in another content area. So you have, Dr. Lee, the professor who spoke and said, I want to be a tier 2 teacher. She's a Black woman with a PhD. She's a tier 2 teacher because she has her PhD in the content area. And
they would say, lay her off first.
Lay her off first, regardless of her seniority. So you can be a tier 2 teacher, with 10 years of 10 years of seniority. You would have to be laid off first for a tier 3 or tier 4 teacher with 1 year of seniority. That's the St. Louis Parks teacher contract. So to say repeal last in, first out is just not enough. What we need to do is make sure that our layoff policies, if schools have to lay people off, that our retention policies value diversity and teacher effectiveness first and foremost.
We're not a state that actually spends a lot of time figuring out how to evaluate teachers so that we know who are of better quality than not. As a matter of fact, I think we have a long history of fighting every attempt to be able to even know how we're doing in terms of teacher performance. So seniority seems to be like an easy fallback, and if not seniority, some other form of rigging a similar type of system to get the same effect. So it almost is like we're in a trick bag. We never do get around to talking about performance, like how well teachers perform.
Yeah.
What are those conversations like at the Capitol? Oh, I can't think of anybody at the Capitol that I know of who is not aware of the fact that teacher quality matters, and that it, how good they are matters. I just don't think anybody up there has proposed anything about how shall we know. What's the conversation about? How do we even know how well teachers are doing?
I mean, I think first step is keeping teachers who are in shortage areas in the classroom. Teachers of color, teachers teaching STEM, teachers teaching art, special education educators. These are all teachers that we value because there are not a lot of them. Whenever a position comes out in rural Minnesota, they're lucky to get 1 or 2 applicants. So why would we focus on seniority over, what schools and students need? So I think that's the easier question to answer, is how do we keep schools, or how do we keep teachers in schools where the kids need them the most? The second question question that you had was, how do we measure effectiveness? Well, when Obama was president, he said all states had to come to me and say, hey, you all hate No Child Left Behind so bad, create a waiver. And that waiver has to include how you're going to measure teacher effectiveness. It also include how you're going to measure student growth. It's going to have to include how you categorize or keep transparent how schools are doing. Minnesota did something really sneaky when Obama asked for that. They made the system so confusing that it is near impossible to understand or to know how well our teachers and how well our schools are doing. And I'll give you an example. This is how, so many schools use, like, if your school is great, you're going to get an A. If it's horrible, you're going to get an F. Or they use, color systems. Green means great, yellow means okay, on progress, red means bad. What Minnesota did was reward, celebration, priority, celebration eligible, continuous improvement. Those were our categories for schools. I always ask people, if you had a choice to send your kid to a priority school, a celebration school, or a reward school, which one would you send your kid to? And they go,
wait a second now, too. And you're asking the question, I get where you're going, like, as if they know what those schools mean.
Yep.
But let's say that any of those schools all mean that the test scores are really low, nobody's learning to read, and no one's coming out with what they need in terms of proficiency, but we call it a reward school. Or we call it a chocolate cake school, or unicorn farts rainbow schools, like we call it whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But beneath that, it means that either kids are learning or they're not learning.
Yeah.
But what you just said, they got away with. They got away with renaming everything, changing the way, like color coding things, like some sort of confusing homeland security system of like orange means this and red means that. Yeah. And they still to this day actually have made it more complicated for understanding even how students are doing. Yeah. Because if you go and look at the website now, the state website for figuring out how students are doing, it's less helpful than it was before millions of dollars of overhaul. Right. Yep. And so we're starting to get, I think, to the point here in some ways, Josh, I don't know that you'll say it, so I'm just going to put it out there. We have a state commissioner of education who was Randy Weingarten's number 2, who came out of St. Paul and has perfected the art of talking perfectly Minnesotan in a way that puts people to sleep and makes them die, makes all of their intellect and reason just die in the face of how beautiful her disposition is. She's a great person. I actually really like her as a person. And when you meet her in person, you will fall prey to it too. She's hard to dislike. She's an amazing weapon. I don't know why. I can see why Randy Weingarten sent her back to Minnesota, because she actually would be more powerful than Randy nationally, because she is so nice and so awesome and in so many ways. And she couldn't care less about Black children getting an education in the state of Minnesota. And she, hand in hand with Denise Speck, who is who is the union of the statewide teachers union here, and a governor who was a teacher and a teacher unionist himself. They've got the perfect trifecta of all the power now locked up in terms of education policy, and it ain't aligned with what children of color need in the state. Right. And they talk like it would be easier if we were Arkansas or somewhere where you have more conservative politicians that you can point out and say, oh my God, it's that conservatism but actually, no, this is as left gets. And it's the perfect storm of double talk, new rating systems that don't rate anything, new tests that don't test anything, new numbers that don't tell us anything. And we're going to sleep on our nation-leading achievement gap again. And it's harder to fight now because it's all really nice people who are lording over it. And then it's mean people like you, Josh. And I think we can admit you're pretty mean. It's like coming across in this show right now, how hostile and angry you are as a militant black man.
Yes.
It's only hostile, militant, bad people like you who are showing up to say, hey, maybe we should rethink this.
Right, exactly. You know, I got Twitter blocked. I don't know if you're part of the Twitter blocked gang of Karen Denise Specht. But
the Karen Committee, the Minnesota Committee of Karens,
the committee Karen
over education. No,
right.
I'm not blocked. So that doesn't mean you are, Josh. Like she blocked you. She didn't block me.
She was saying that students that attend private colleges and universities should not get state financial aid because that's akin to vouchers. And I said that's a privileged position to take, and then she blocked me. No, you're absolutely right. I think we're resting on our laurels here. That it's enough to say that Governor Walz was an educator, therefore box checked. We have education done. That Commissioner Ricker was an educator, and she led the National Teachers Union. Box checked. We have education done there. Julie Blaha was an educator, and she's the state auditor, and she's supposed to hold our police and our schools accountable. She hasn't, but she's supposed to hold them accountable. But box check, because she's a teacher. 10% of our legislators are educators. Box check, they're teachers. But it doesn't really go beyond that in the state. When we say, where are the people of color? Where are the parents that are outraged because their kids aren't getting a great education, or their kids are being suspended and expelled every day, or secluded, or not being able to read? Right, 2 and 3 of our kids of color can't read at grade level. Where is that outrage? Where is that representation in the legislature, or among our Department of Education, or in our governor's office? If we had those people, I would think, okay, well, we're on the right track. We're prioritizing the voices and the people that matter the most. But what we as a state do is we value whether or not somebody has a teaching license and says box checked, education is taken care of, all while kids are not being taken care of. I think to your point, Chris, you're absolutely right. I mean, Mary Catherine Ricker, she's a very nice person, very sweet person. We have monthly calls where we talk about education and education justice and how we can implement that well. But it's not enough, right? Like Minnesota Nice is killing our kids, and it's killing them slowly and killing our communities. So
Minnesota Nice will literally put your ass in the ground.
It will kill you.
Minnesota Nice is a knee to the neck in a way like other knees to the neck don't get credit for, because listen, it would be harder for me if Mary Catherine, for instance, was some sort of ogre or mean person. Yeah. She's very difficult for me because she is so likable. She's like the sweetest person ever. And it's like why I don't like to be in her company very much, because you'll fall beneath the spell. She is just literally not a person of ill will who does some of the most damaging stuff for our kids policy-wise ever. She's way more if I were trying to create the universal soldier of the future to replace Randy, it would be Mary Catherine. She will win the day. I actually do want to show, give pictures too, because I think actually pictures make a big difference in how we view these things. So I want to show people the picture here. I'm sharing my screen a little bit. And just want to show who we're talking about when we say these things, because pictures worth 1,000 words. So this is our governor, Tim Walz, former teacher, high school teacher, super nice guy, very competent governor like we haven't had in a long time. In this really tough time of COVID, he is leading in a way that is so much more understated than the way other governors are, but he's getting the job done in ways that they're not getting it done. So kind of super humble, but teacher affiliated, teacher loving, was a teacher himself, was a white male teacher in a union who, as progressive as he wants to be, that's what he brings to the table. We're not going to break through as a people of color saying, no, you're going to listen to us and we're going to have the power for 5 minutes. It's not going to happen. He's going to surround himself with chosen, tokenized people of color who will tell him what he wants to hear. And that's the way politics works in Minnesota. This is Julie Blaha, former union leader, teacher, educator, just as nice as can be. in person, a great person also. Can be a little tough sometimes, but just in general, Minnesota nice to the nth degree, has a very big hand in education policy now and has for years. This is Mary Catherine Ricker, the famous Mary Catherine Ricker, the nicest person you are ever going to meet who you disagree with in education policy, and you will never say a mean thing to her in person because she is just impossible to do that to. She is a good person, and does some of the most damaging things around teacher evaluation, teacher testing of students, and performance measures and all of that. She's clouded the whole thing with a bunch of happy talk. A newspaper article came out talking about the release of the new test results. And she said, we have to stop talking about how bad those results are for kids of color and start looking on the bright side. Like they're not as hungry anymore. Right. Like, like we have to have a measurement of how hungry kids are, not how much they can read or not read. Right.
Yeah.
And then here we go. This is the president of Minnesota Committee of Karens. This is Denise Beck. This is the statewide teachers union president. And this is the prototypical Minnesota teacher right here. If there were some sort of archetype, if you look up Minnesota teacher in the dictionary, this is the picture that will pop up in front of you. And this is the person who will show up with policies aimed at closing, for instance, charter schools of color, blocking teachers of color from getting in the classroom with really clever policies, attacking, right now, floating a moratorium on charter schools when in fact Minnesota's charter schools are mostly all of color and come out of the communities that they are existing in, and she will do a very good job of attacking all of those things from this point of just how nice we all are, and my God, praying to the progressive gods of niceness.
Chris,
and we're dying. We're dying from it.
What I'll say too is right, like we have, in the educating Black and brown kids has always been controversial. In the past, we've set up our own schools to educate our kids. Once our kids were starting to learn, the Klan came in their robes and torched down the schools. We had no more schools, right? The Klan has put down their torches. They've taken off their hoods and they've taken up public policy. And now when students of color, when communities of color are coming together, they probably don't identify as the Klan anymore, but that white supremacy still exists in public policy making and in education. I was just speaking with a legislator a couple months ago who said, what are we going to do about all of those schools that are promoting segregation? And I said, well, what do you mean by promoting segregation? And he said, all of those schools that are being led by people of color, that have all students of color, they really need to be more diverse. So we need to shut those schools down.
Wow.
Right. And that's kind of the underlying tone too of this anti-charter movement of we need to shut these schools down because they're promoting segregation in the way that we need to integrate our schools. As white people, we need to integrate our schools, not thinking about communities of color and what they need. We as white people need a Black friend near my son and my daughter, right? So they've taken off their hoods, they've put down their torches, and they're trying to pass policy to burn down schools that are empowered by and attended by communities of color. I've heard comments like this from Denise Beck before, where we just need to figure out what charter schools and how we value charter schools before we start continuing them. So let's just shut them down right now. Understand your own privilege. Understand how you, as a wealthy white person who's one of the most powerful people in the state of Minnesota, how you can influence and harm the least among us in Minnesota, low-income families, low-income mothers of color who are sending their kids to a school to be empowered and affirmed as Black citizens in the state. That's what I'm saying is that's what the union needs to do, not think about kind of the third party, maybe some racist over there needs to change their mind, but understand how their own policies and how their own messaging is harming communities of color, with LIFO, with their position on charter schools, with really any position on school choice, how you are hurting communities of color in the process.
I love your optimism And that's what I'm going to call what you just said, optimism, because anything that requires white racists, especially on the left, to understand the damage that they're doing to us as a people, anything that requires, if our liberation is tied and connected to them waking up one morning and doing the right thing or understanding the negative impact of what they're doing, then we're doomed.
Yes.
Because it is in their best interest to keep doing what they're doing right now. And they are all about their own best interest. And their best interest is to, when people say what you just said, is to find some tokenized Negroes to come and refute what you said, not to address it.
Right.
Not to listen to it, not to take it in, not to be good people and try to actually have a shared society where we share power. The power concedes nothing without a demand. And we're not demanding anything as people of color. We're asking for good white people to be good white people. And that hasn't happened. That's been a strategy that has been failing us for a long time, failing our kids for a long time, continues to do so. So what we need to do, I believe, on our side of the fence, number one, is change what it is that we're looking for. We're actually not looking for public policies. We're looking for a change in the power.
Yes.
The way that power works right now has to change. Who gets to tell us no and yes on things that are germane to our life and our liberation and our livelihood is actually what has to change. That's the thing. No, you don't get to just pass laws and tell us that you may or may not pass stuff that makes it easier for us to have access to great teachers, access to great schools that we run on our own, schools that we actually have a great hand in deciding. No, you don't get to just behind closed doors, meet with your unions, decide how you're going to defeat us, and still get to be a good person without being called out on it. But Josh, here comes the tough part.
Yeah.
For me, the tough part is before you even get to them, you have to get to people of color, especially the ones who are being tokenized and bought off by philanthropy with grants or unions with grants or the political power with grants. We have very few Black elected officials, and the ones that we do have do very interesting things with their own kids to the extent that they can. Private school, out of neighborhood schools, out of site schools. And then when we come talking to them, they have all the talking points that the masters have given them. And they are equally as bad as everybody else. So until we get our own people aligned, first of all, about what the goal is, and I think the goal is a major reordering of the power, like how we have power to decide who's going to teach us, where they're going to teach us, what they're going to teach us, has to be in our own hands. And we have nothing else to fight about except for that. So then when we bump into a Mary Catherine or a Denise or a Waltz or any of the committee of Karens and Steves, we can basically just say, listen, we know you have to do what's in the best interest of you and your people, but at the end of the day, we're going to be in control of how we educate our kids.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think what that calls for is critical mass. Again, talking about the legislature, it was on purpose that that long-serving people of color are no longer serving on the education committee. Wow. They were asking for too much and too much of their community for their communities. And they were passed over for leadership. They're no longer serving on the education committees. And the gavel went to two white people, which is problematic, right? So, and then you're absolutely, and the people who kind of stay, the only communities of color that are actually in the education committees at the legislature are new. They have their own personal experiences, and I can guarantee you, if they keep talking about communities of color and fighting for communities of color, that there will be an effort to push them out as well. So you're right. I mean, I think one is how do we create a system of power to protect the good people who have power to continue to fight for their communities without losing that power? Because at the end of the day, a legislator just wants to get reelected.
Which they can't really do, by pushing the wrong direction on some of these issues. Right.
Exactly. I mean, if Senator Hayden was out speaking about how he should have the right as a Black parent to send his kid to a private school, which he does, then he could lose his positions of power in South Minneapolis.
So for people watching, Senator Hayden is one of the few Black senators in the state of Minnesota, and by few I mean one or two, right?
He is One of two. Yeah.
One of two, yeah. So, and the other one, both of them actually have been involved in a lot of the policy making that I was involved in the future, but do very different thing with their own kids. He has kids that he sends to private schools, not just to private schools, but to like the best private school that money can buy in the Twin Cities. And we met with him as a black group. He now sits on the group that we had brought to him to meet with him once, and he told us point blank in a meeting, y'all aren't really my constituents, meaning y'all as in black people. The majority of my constituents are actually white, and they're not for a lot of this stuff y'all pushing for. Told us point blank, right? Told us point blank in a meeting, black people weren't really his constituency, that we're not the ones that elected him and got him elected and whatever. Our jaws dropped looking at a dark black man who knew that the schools were so raggedy that he took his kids out of them and made sure that they avoided it, tell other black people that we're not really his constituency. But it shouldn't be shocking. That's Minnesota in a nutshell. Right. That's our politics. And I don't call it out just to be provocative. I call it out because it's the truth. It's what we will encounter. I don't want to lie to young advocates, to people who are coming up behind us to advocate on these things. I don't want to lie to them. This is what you're going to face.
Right. And I think, if those power structures existed where we could say, you know what, Senator Hayden, you should be able to send your kids to a private school, and you should be able to have that choice as a parent, especially as a black parent trying to break cycles of racism and poverty. Like, that should be right. I think then he would change his perspective and say, you know what, I'm going to fight for the things that I do so that other people can be empowered to do that.
Yeah. It's just a shame that he would need that to fight.
It's
just a shame. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, listen, we're coming up on an hour here. We're across the way to an hour. I want everybody to know more about Ed Allies, a group here in Minnesota. Funny story about Ed Allies. Started with a friend and one of my board members, Dan Sellers, and I met with Dan before Ed Allies was announced and became a thing. And he told me that Ed Allies was coming. And I gave him the best advice I had. I was like, Dan, for the love of God, do not name it anything with Ed in the title. Be totally different. Call it something that's happy, like Sprouts. Something that means young people and children, like Sprouts, or carrots and peas. A good Minnesota Lutheran recipe, carrots and peas. Call it something else, but don't call it. And it came out like a week later, Ed Allies, and I felt like a big jackass because I was like, okay.
You criticized the baby's name before it was born.
I was like, for the love of God, don't call it something like. And a week later, it came out and it was Ed Allies. But that name has become synonymous with everything we talked about today, with actually just the continuous fight for great public policy for kids that aren't being spoken for and done from a community basis. I think it's a testament to you that you are now the executive director, but you had to be in the trenches a bit before you took the lead of the organization, which I actually really love and appreciate, because until you've been in the fight, you've stared in the faces of people who have power and heard all of the excuses for why we can't do better. I don't think you're ready to lead this organization. So as we leave, tell people about the agenda for Ed Allies.
So Ed Allies, we're an education advocacy group. We're dedicated to three things: making sure that we're distributing resources equitably, making sure that parents have options and can choose a school that is culturally relevant for their own kids, and making sure that we have teachers and school leaders that are highly effective and great for our educators, or for our students, diverse, highly effective, can start moving the needle. I think one thing that I'll say, Chris, as we head out, is right now, like I said, we're in 1868. We have a choice right now. We have a choice. We can either allow this movement to pass as a fad. So post George Floyd's murder, we can have the Black Lives Matter signs come down and revert to a constant, unwelcoming, and violent place for Black and brown people in the state of Minnesota. Or we can do what we didn't do after 1868, and we can continue to advance these policies. But I think that requires a keen and focused sacrifice from white people in the state of Minnesota. Give up your power, give up your influence and your money to allow Black and brown people to thrive. Truly celebrate diversity. It's going to be painful. It's not going to be easy, but we really need a change so that we don't revert to back and look back at this as, wow, that was a passing fad. So kind of as we move forward, education justice cannot be an afterthought. It has to be included as part of that attention of making sure that all people can just thrive in this state, because they're not.
Mm. I love Josh Crosson. And I should say this for the record, because ain't nobody ever going to claim me to be a person that doesn't apologize when I am wrong. So Josh and I had a massive, like, epic kind of Twitter battle a couple of years ago, and I savaged Josh on Twitter.
I don't know about savaged. But
well, I it wasn't like Megan Thee Stallion type of savage, but it was like, I came at you in a way, and you were just like so calm about it, like, wow, really? Tell me more, and I was a real jackass about it, but as people should do, and definitely as men should do, and definitely as Black men should do, they should actually have disagreements and end up in a place where they can have a fabulous conversation like this that we just had today, and like we have been having since, and whatever, and end in a situation where, like, I am so appreciative of the work that you do and the graceful way in which you have, like, handled your work. I don't know how you do it necessarily, to be very honest with you, how you've stayed sane all these years. It's been years now that you have been, like, working with these same group of powerful people. And you, year after year, show up again with grace and ready to do battle and do the fight. And now you lead an organization that gives you a platform to keep doing it. But anyways, I just wanted to make it publicly known that as allies and as friends and as Black people, definitely as Black men, we have these disagreements. And the success in life is to be able to come back around and to be allies on behalf of our children, and to truly appreciate each other and see the benefit of each other existing within the struggle. So thank you for all that you do, Josh. I appreciate it, man.
Love you, Chris. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thanks for being a partner.
Anybody who wants to get in touch with Josh, his Twitter handle has been going across the bottom. It's just at Josh Crosson. I'm always so amazed by these people that got their actual name for their Twitter handles in the beginning, but at Josh Crosson, and Crosson is Crosson. And that's how you can reach him. If you want to reach me, as always, Christopher@activist.com. I pride myself on activism and being an activist because I have few other standings in life, a few other credentials. This is what I really care about, is being an activist, activating and throwing the bomb when it needs to be thrown. So Christopher@activist.com. Josh, I hope you'll come back.
Yes.
As things progress. Appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you too. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.